right, got kind of a fun issue and problem to came up from a client today to solve, and I thought it would be a great example of utilizing a couple of different tools and something that you may not necessarily run into all that often, but if you do, um, man, sure would be a lot easier to be able to handle this type of thing in bulk. So let me explain the situation, what we have here. So I have a large international client, has a couple thousand users within their database. They are adding and removing users from their D365 environment daily. From new employees, employees leaving. It's a very frequently moving target in terms of users being licensed and unlicensed and coming in and out of the environment. So here's the problem. They're an international group. They have a lot of date and time fields, and they use a lot of the out-of-box date and time fields that are time zone dependent. So in the Dynamics 365 world, of course, what that means is anytime you have a field in the system that is a date and time, and it's using the time zone, so we can see right here, like the estimated close date on an opportunity, what happens is, as a user, I enter that date into the system of August 8th of 2023. At the database level, at the very bottom level, what the system does is it takes that date, and depending on the type of field, there's often a time hidden in the background, and it converts it down to Universal Standard Time, UST or UCT, whatever it is, UTC, sorry. And it converts it all the way down. Then anytime someone else goes to take a look at this field in the system, it takes that UTC time and it converts it up to that other user's time zone. For the most part, and if you have customers or clients or you're working with an environment where everyone's pretty much in the same place, you're all in the Midwest, you're all on the East Coast or wherever else, it's not really a problem. But when you have people who are working 8, 10, 12 hours apart in terms of time zones, this can cause a lot of issues. And the reason for that is I may have 8/8 of 2023 listed in here as a user. However, at the database in the background, this is actually showing when I fill it in as August 8th, 2023 at 12 a.m. So the very first minute of the day, right? It sticks a time on the back. So it then takes that 12 a.m., converts it down to UTC, and now let's say someone from the West Coast comes in and takes a look at this record. What is 12 a.m. on August 8th for me is actually 10 p.m. on August 7th for them. So now when they're looking at this field, we can be looking at the exact same record. Now all of a sudden that date is one day off. And that can really make reporting and just communication and a lot of things very difficult to do. So, time zone fields in general can be kind of a pain to work with. But in this specific situation, what we had is we have a couple of different, or we had really a lot of users, right? This international company who are US based, but when they get licensed as a user within D365, the default time zone for their user is set to UTC. So they're actually working in coordinated universal time or whatever it is and putting those dates in, but then someone else on their team who has actually updated their time zone properly in the personal settings comes in and they see a different date on these records, even though they could be sitting right next to each other. So the charge that we had from this customer, the request, is that they wanted to make it so that every user who comes into this environment gets the same time zone set by default. And we wanted that time zone to be Central Time. So US Central Chicago time. Now, taking a look at CRM right here, for those of you that haven't seen it before, an individual user's time zone settings are done in this gear icon up at the top and under the menu that's known as the personalization settings. That pops open this window right here. This allows users to define their default tab, the pane that they're in, how many records they're seeing per page, but then also most importantly here for this conversation, has their time zone. And this is how the system knows what type of conversion to do for those date and time fields that I was talking about. So right here you can see I am set to Central Time. Now, the big question that I had, and what I never really had a chance to do before, is how can I access these records and update them? And this really has to be done in two different ways. One, you could say, I want to do a bulk update one time, and I want to put everyone into Central Time call it a day, right? And we're good. And we're going to go through, there is a tool in XRM Toolbox that allows us to do that. However, for this particular situation, this customer, as I mentioned, is giving new licenses out daily and removing some from users. Some users have their license removed and then re-added back in. And they wanted something that could consistently run and make sure that these users were in the proper time zone and that we had everything set to Central Time of the US for those users. So the big question came down to, where are those settings stored? If you take a look in the advanced find window in Microsoft Dynamics, you're not going to be able to see it, or at least I was not able to find it anywhere. So then it came down to, right, it's in CRM, which my rule of thumb is if it's something in CRM and I can change the values directly within CRM, it means there's a record somewhere that is tied to. Might not be easy to get to, but there's going to be a record somewhere in the database that controls this. So what I want to do is take a little bit of time to run through kind of those two different approaches of how we can solve this problem and ways that we can help make sure that this doesn't continue to be an issue moving forward. So we're going to do the easy one first, and that's using XRM Toolbox to do a one-time bulk update. So I'm going to pull up XRM Toolbox right here. For those who haven't seen it, XRM Toolbox, of course, is a free utility tool that allows you to connect to your Dynamics 365 instance, and they give you a number of different options, and there are different tools developed by the community, all free, that let you do things that you can't really do directly within CRM itself. This is a perfect example of that, where even I, as a system admin, can't see in the system what people have their personal settings tuned to. It's just not information that's surfaced or available. So instead of telling everyone, sending out an email and saying, go to your personal settings, change the time zone, because, well, they're users and not all of them are going to do that, right? That's just kind of the nature of how it goes. We need to find some way to make sure that we can enforce that. So the first tool that we can use is this one called the User Settings Utility. It's an out-of-box default tool that comes with XRM Toolbox. So if you go out and install XRM Toolbox, you're going to see that one come up. And this is going to allow us to basically update those personal settings in bulk one time. So I'm connected to my organization right now. I'm going to open up this tool. And what we're going to see is on the left-hand side is where we get our users and settings, and I can click on the load button in order for it to pull all of that information up and over. And then on the right-hand side, we have all of those different personal settings, and you can see they all just say no change right now. Now what this allows me to do is come in here, and I can even take a look at my specific user. And if I click on one individual user, I can see time zone is set to Central Time, 100 records per page, right? What's the pane to show at startup? How's my advanced find mode? All of that information is all set directly within here. If I pick more than one record, you'll see it kind of just starts showing general information. So a lot of these are in coordinated universal time in terms of their time zone. So what I can do here is one-time update. I can check all up at the top, go over to my time zone, pick the time zone that I want, in this case, Central Time. There's nothing harder than looking through a list of time zones and trying to find the specific one you're looking for. It should be at the top. There we go. Central Time. And then I can hit Update User Settings. This will go through and it will update, and you'll see it'll run through every single one of them. It will update all of those users to be set to Central Time. And you can do that for any of the different properties that you see there. If you want everyone to have 250 records per page, or make sure that everyone is starting on the exact same startup page and pane, right? It goes straight to accounts or straight to the sales area and accounts, or straight to the sales area and opportunities. You can do that and you can set that straight. This is run through and completed. It gives you a little log file. So if you do want to be able to see, not overly interesting here, but you do get date and time stamp, the user name, and it lets you know that it was updated successfully, though you can see even right here, one of ours did have an error which is that one of these service accounts, it didn't want to let me update it for them. But otherwise, everyone else updated successfully. So that's your first option for kind of doing these in bulk. Great for a smaller organization that just kind of wants to reset, or you want to make sure that you've got everyone on the same page as you're starting to go through. All right, so we talked about the easy way, kind of one-time bulk update using XRM Toolbox to update the time zone codes and other personal settings utilities for users as they come in. So the question now comes down to, how can we set up a recurring process that's going to run, that's going to make sure that these settings are up to date and accurate for any new users who get licensed in the environment without an admin or someone else from the business needing to go into XRM Toolbox and update those settings every single day. The way that we're going to do that is by writing a flow through Power Automate. But first, what we need to do is learn a little bit more about how those personal settings are stored within the system and what some of those codes and information mean. So in order to do that, we're going to first head back over to XRM Toolbox, and we're going to use one of my all-time favorite tools that I use almost every single day called Fetch XML Builder. Fetch XML Builder allows us to essentially query the database, but do it in a much more advanced way and a much better way than you might find with an advanced find window, for example. So what we're going to do here is open up this window, and we are going to take a look at our entity table. And when we pull this up, we are looking for something with personal user settings. And so we're going to scroll all the way down to the use. And you can see here we have user entity instance data, user entity UI settings, which looks promising. So let's actually click on that. And let's do a real quick query to see what we have here. And that's not particularly interesting. So if we look at here, this is actually showing things like recently viewed items and views. So, right, what are the different contact records or anything else that someone has seen here recently? So that's not overly helpful. We're actually going to scroll down a little bit further here, and you'll see we actually have two different menu options that both say user settings. The first one, let's go ahead and execute that, has some basic information to it, but there's really not a whole lot here. There's only one record that's coming back in this table. That doesn't look like the right thing. So let's go ahead and switch it to the next one down for user settings, and now execute. Now here we go. This looks like the right information. So first of all, we have a bunch of records. We should basically have one record per user that's in here. And when we take a look at some of the different headers that we have available, they make sense for the type of personal settings we've been looking at. Your date format string, for example, Outlook sync interval, last modified on currency format code, business date, time format string. So these are all of the different settings that are available in that menu for us to be able to update, which is great. So this looks like the right table and piece of information. I'm just going to open this up and take a look at the Fetch XML, and we can see that the actual table name in the background is simply called user settings. So that's good for us to know, kind of keep track of, that this is the user settings table that we have access to and that we're pulling information from. So now as we take a look through this, let's go ahead and just refine down the attributes that we're looking for. And really what I want to pull in here is I want to see the system user that this is tied to. So we're going to pick up our system user ID. We are going to pick up our time zone code. So here we have time zone code. Let's just pull up our time format for that just because, and we'll do the paging limit as well and hit OK. So now if I execute, you can see here that we have paging limit, which is the number of records per page that a user is going to be seeing as they come through. the system user ID that this particular personalization item is set to, your time format code and time format string is showing how time is being shown. And then really most importantly for us is all the way over here on the right, we have our time zone code. So time zone code, and these codes are how Dynamic CRM stores all of the time zone information in the system. So when it is serving information up to different people, it's checking their time zone code. A lot of times when you save records, the record gets saved and there's a time zone code on the side that then pulls over. If you need to add a time zone field onto a record, which I've done a couple of times before, there's actually a specific custom control for that time zone. The field itself, in terms of a type, is a whole number. It's an integer field. And that's because what you're actually storing are these codes that you see right here. So most of these, as you can see, are set to 20. There's a couple that are set to 92. Now the question comes down to, what do these numbers even mean, right? If you try and Google it, it's actually extremely hard to find what all of these different codes mean and what each one corresponds to in terms of a time zone. However, there is an easy way to figure this out and to see what you're looking for. And we're going to continue to use the same tool to do it. So I'm actually going to go and just do a new query in a new window here for Fetch XML Builder. I want to make sure I pull everything back. And the table that I'm looking for is one that every CRM environment should have available, and it's called time zone definition. So you can select that table, and if I just execute this query, that's all I have to do is just check the table. Here we can see our time zone codes, so I'm going to sort by those, and then you have your standard name right there. So this is where you're going to be able to see that time zone, was it 20? I think that we saw for a lot of them, is Central Standard Time, whereas 25 is Canada's Central Standard Time. I think we had a couple in 92, which is UTC, but you can see the full list of all the different time zones that are available in your system listed right here. So let's say for our particular example, we have a lot of people in Central. We've got some folks that are over in UTC. Let's say that we want to be moving people over to Eastern Time in the US. If I scroll down here, I can see that US Eastern Standard Time is 40 for a code. So we're going to remember that 40 is what we want to be setting our different users to. So this table, very helpful to be able to pull up this query quick and easy, but gives you an idea of what all your different time zones are that are available within the system. So now we found our table where we know these updates need to take place. We found our time zone codes. So now it's just a matter of writing our Power Automate flow in order to take advantage of this and make sure that users are being set to the proper time zone code. So the last trick before we get into that is actually going to be something that we'll need to know for Power Automate. So if anyone has ever used that before, when you do your update step in Power Automate, it needs the GUID, the GUID of the record that you want to update. You tell it the table and you tell it the record ID of what you want to do. These user settings do not have their own GUID assigned to them. This took a long time for me to kind of figure out. Instead, they have the exact same GUID as the system user that they are linked to. So that's the second part that we want to remember as we go into the Power Automate flow, is that we want to essentially pull in, and when we are updating our personal user setting, we're going to use the GUID of the system user that comes in. Okay, so we've got everything we need right now. Again, our time zone, what was it? We're going to 40 is our time zone, and the system user ID, the GUID, is what we want to use to update. So let's take this and we're going to head over to Power Automate, and we're going to write a flow that's going to be able to handle this entire process for us automatically. So back over in my web browser, I'm in the Power Apps Maker portal here right now for my environment, and I've created an empty solution for us to be able to work in. I'm assuming that I'm doing this in a sandbox environment that I want to be able to push over to a production environment. So doing that within a solution are the best practices for us. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to click on New, Automation, Cloudflow, and we are going to do, automated is going to be anytime something happens. Instant means we can trigger it manually. Scheduled means that it runs at a regular time. Typically for this situation, what I would do is I would say that we want to do it automated. Anytime a user is created within our table, we want this flow to run and to set it new. For right now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to set it to, we'll set it to instant. How about that? So that way I can just manually run this after we write it, and that gives us a chance to see how it works. So I'm going to do an instant one here. Update user setting time zone to Eastern Standard Time. And we're going to manually trigger that flow. So I'm going to go ahead and create this, and we have our manual trigger right here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add an input into this, and I'm just going to give us a place for us to hard code in the user GUID. Typically speaking, if we were triggering this off of the creation of a user, you'd have that information available. Actually, you know what? We'll go ahead and we'll show that. Okay, so stop recording here. Okay, so we're going to go into Power Automate, and what we're going to do is we're going to add in a new cloud flow. So we're going to go to New, Automation, Cloud Flow. And when we add in our new cloud flow, we're going to do this as an automated flow. And what that's going to allow us to do is to have this trigger anytime a system user is being created. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to jump right into the flow, and I'm going to set up my trigger in here. My trigger is going to be in the Microsoft Dataverse connector when a row is added, modified, or deleted. It's going to go ahead and create my connection to Dataverse. And now we're going to set this as anytime a row is added, we're looking for the system users table. Sorry about that. Just users is what it's called. So we're looking for the users table. And then our scope, we're just going to set it to organization because we want this to run for everyone. So this is now a flow that's going to trigger anytime a user is created. So we're going to call this user on create update time zone for our flow name. Okay. So anytime a user is created, this flow will be triggered. Now we're going to do our new step, and we're going to keep this pretty basic for purposes of this demo here. And that is that we know we need to update a record. And we want to update that user settings record in that table that we were just talking about and found. So that is a Microsoft Dataverse table. We want to update a row. So that's the action that we're going to choose. And our table name, as you'll recall, was called user settings. And here's where it gets tricky. Again, there are two of them. You will recall when we were looking at Fetch XML that we had the second option, and it was the one that had the capital S on it, is the table that we're looking for. So there's our user settings. It's going to ask for the row ID, but now you can see all of those different fields that we had looked at. All the different personal options show up on here, including our time zones, in order for us to update. So let's go ahead and let's clean this up a little bit. We're going to say user is created for our trigger. We're going to update user personal settings. So we're going to the user settings table. Our row ID, if you recall, is the GUID of the user. That's what we found out in there, and I troubleshooted all of that so you don't have to try and figure it out yourself. So that is the actual user's GUID. So what we're going to do is come all the way down here. Here we go. I'm going to search for dynamic content from our trigger, which is a new user is created, and there's a field on there called user with the subtitle of unique identifier. That's the GUID of the user record that we're working on. That's what we're going to use to identify our personal settings that we need to update. So that's in there. That's great. Now all I need to do is work my way down, and I can find my time zone code field that we were looking at. And all I need to do in here is just type 40. That's it. Pretty easy. At this point, what I'm going to do is save our flow. And in the most basic example that we have to solve this problem, this flow will now run. Anytime we create a user, it's going to run and it's going to set their time zone to Eastern US, Eastern Standard Time. So right now, that's about all we need to do, and that would be completed. Now, obviously, depending on your specific use case, you can add a lot more into this flow. This particular organization that I was working with that kind of prompted finding out about this, they actually had a much more complex set of requirements. They wanted any of their users who were based in the US to automatically have their time zone set to Central Time. If they're not in the US, then we needed to leave it alone. They also had an extra wrinkle in there where if the person was US based, but they had their time zone set to something like Pacific Time or Eastern Time already, then we didn't want to touch those either, right? We wanted to leave those alone and really just focus on updating the users that were basically in UTC time, but should have been somewhere in the US and setting it to US as a default. In terms of the trigger, that can obviously change a lot as well, depending on your use case. This one will run anytime a user record is created. The one that I did for the client is actually a nightly process that will run. And so that will go through and that will pick up any users that don't meet that criteria that I ran through and will automatically update those settings for them. So that's something that's just going to run on a regular process, and it does things in bulk because we have a whole lot of users that we're working through. Obviously, of course, you could also have this trigger not only when a row is added, but also if something is modified. So maybe if the license status on that user record is updated, you want to go ahead and trigger this. Okay, so we made a change to our user record so that this would run on modified. This is now running and has succeeded. And open up our flow log here. Looks like it updated the user personal settings correctly, which is great. It means that we had the right table picked and we had the right GUID because it was able to find a record to update. So now I'm going to go back to my CRM system. I'm going to click on personalization settings, and we are now set to Indiana time, Eastern. So that must be the time zone that I picked rather than the Eastern Standard Time. But you can see it was Central before. It switched over. I might need to go back and review those time zone codes again to make sure I get the right one. But this is now a process that really start to finish was pretty easy, can make your life significantly easier in terms of not having to monitor and update and check those time zones every single time you need to run it. And hopefully just make overall usage of the system much easier for the end users, which is the goal. If you don't have to make them come into these settings and make some changes, then it's best to just go ahead and handle it yourself on the technical side. Obviously, this concept expands out. So if you wanted to do this for the number of records per page, setting the default pane for people as they first come in, setting currencies, time formats, anything else that your organization wants to enforce a more standard approach, you can absolutely do it this way. And of course, also the cloud flow, as I mentioned before, you can handle in a lot of different ways as well. You can trigger it based off of the user. The one particular case that I did, I actually queried the user settings table and made a couple jumps to the user and a few other tables to see whether or not that exact setting needed to be updated on a daily basis. So when it schedules it and runs it, if it doesn't find anyone that needs to be updated, it does nothing. If it does find someone, then it goes ahead and it does those in bulk and updates them. So a lot of different options, a lot of choices. But yeah, this was the first time in 10 years that I had to find a way in order to automatically set this information as we go through. And it was a fun problem to go through and solve. But once I had a chance to do it, I certainly learned something new. So that just about does it for today. Hopefully the information that we gave here was helpful. Someone else is running into the same problem. We can save you a little bit of time and a little bit of effort. Very much appreciate you coming in to listen to this video today. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments, please be sure to go ahead and post those down below or contact me. If you're running into another issue that you would like some help with, can't quite figure out what to do, again, send that information over. I'm always looking to learn new things and find new ways to do stuff within Dynamics 365 and the Power Platform. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching today. It's another Tips with Tom, and we'll talk to you soon.